Welcome back to Underage Packers. This is Joey here. Today, I wanted to recap the Cleveland Browns game, and I wanted to talk to a smart person, one of the smartest people on Packers online community, and that is Paul Bretl. How are you doing today, Paul? Paul?
Wow, what an introduction! But thank you for having me. I'm always happy to join you, Joey.
No problem. Paul, I mean, you're doing it all on the YouTube. I mean, you're on Dairyland Express. You're on Cheesehead TV. You got your own great YouTube channel. So pleasure to have you on here.
Absolutely.
Sure. So, like I said, I got some questions that I just like have been on my mind since the Browns game, and I reserved them for a smart person like you. So I hope you have the answers for me today.
I'll do my best.
All right. So after that Cleveland Browns game, I rewatched the broadcast like I typically do, except I just watched the first two quarters and then the end of the fourth. And after watching that, it wasn't too bad because it's just like two great quarters of play from the Packers, and then a Rasul Douglas interception. La la la, great Christmas. Everybody's happy as Packers fan, but there was obviously some negative stuff mixed in between there. But let's start off with some positives in that first half and really throughout the whole game was the stellar offensive line play, and that's certainly been a trend so far this year, especially with the players they've been missing. I think all of us, when Elton Jenkins went out a few weeks ago against Minnesota, we were like, shoot, that's a big bullet. He's going to be out for a while, obviously, for the rest of this year with the ACL. And we're like, if we lose anybody else, specifically the starter, Billy Turner, the only original starter starting in his original position at that point in time at right tackle, if we lose Billy Turner in these coming weeks, what is going to happen? And we did end up losing Billy Turner, and Dennis Kelly, the veteran, slid in. And now we're looking at quite the motley crew, unpredictable crew at offensive line, but they are really getting the job done. This past week against Cleveland, a really stellar pass rush. Myles Garrett, obviously a defensive player of the year candidate, and he was pretty much silent throughout the whole game. So, Paul, what are your thoughts on this offensive line? You got a rookie in there, like I just mentioned, quite a handful of unpredictable pieces.
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredibly impressive. After every injury that has occurred this season, it feels like we ask ourselves, is this the one? Is this the straw that breaks the camel's back, as they say? But it hasn't been. I mean, they continue to play at a high level, and I wrote about this recently. One of the reasons that they've been able to maintain that stability amongst all the instability is the continued development of the guards, John Runyan and Royce Newman. I mean, Aaron Rodgers even said, this was a couple months ago, that he was maybe surprised is the wrong word, but surprised by how well Runyan was playing, because he's just been steady Eddie since he stepped in. But if you recall, during training camp, he was one of the 3-4 guys competing for a starting spot at guard, but he was also the first one to be eliminated from that job. So his play in the regular season versus the preseason, for whatever reason that difference is, like I said, it's been night and day. And then Royce Newman, he's just continued to get better each and every week. I know PFF's grades are not the be all end all, but they can be helpful in illustrating, how a player is playing. If a player is playing really, really good, PFF's going to have them graded really well. Same thing if they're playing really, really bad. And for a good stretch of the season, Newman was one of PFF's lowest graded guards, but his play has continued to get better each and every week, especially in pass protection where he did struggle. And so that those two, their continued development has been a big part of it. And then also when we look at Josh Nijman, we always knew that he had the tools, that we always heard about it, but where was he at in his development? And now we're seeing that in action. I mean, Myles Garrett only had 3 pressures. We don't know where he was at injury-wise, because he did have the groin injury, how much that hampered him or not. But if you're on the field, you're on the field. And him only having 3 pressures was a huge part of Green Bay's success. Now, I will say, Matt LaFleur, Aaron Rodgers, they're helping these guys out. If you watch Josh Nijman play, there were a lot of times where he had a tight end lined up next to him, and the tight end was helping him chip. Aaron Rodgers, he got the ball out in about 2.25 seconds on average, which is really, really fast, the quick passing game. So that's been really helpful as well. Ben Fennell posted on Twitter a clip of that pass from Rodgers to Devontae at the end of the game, the one that was dropped. And Garrett just absolutely beat Yash, but Rodgers had the ball out in like 1.5 seconds. Like, even for someone like Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, the elite of the elite pass rushers, if the ball's out of the quarterback's hands in 2 seconds or less, it's extremely difficult to get there. So, of course, we have to give the players the utmost credit in all of this. They're the ones on the field performing. We have to give Adam Stenavich, Luke Butkus, Matt LaFleur the credit, and also Aaron Rodgers as well, because it's totally a team effort in their level of play, but also the game plan that Matt LaFleur has drawn up to help those guys out.
For sure. And it's almost like looking at this group overall they have at offensive line. I mean, they're all very versatile and they're all like reliable, which is a great problem to have, of more than 5 great offensive linemen. So what are you thinking? It was a big chat at the start of this year. What are they going to do with Elton Jenkins, and what does that mean for the other guard or tackle positions? So what are you thinking they do when potentially all 3 of David Bakhtiari, Billy Turner, and Josh Myers are back down the line?
That's a good question. I mean, Billy Turner's really the key in all of this, because he has been, just as many of the guys have, but he's been really, really good on that right side, especially considering his first season here where he was the right guard. I know he battled injuries at the end, but he wasn't playing at the level that he is now at right tackle, which is supposedly going to be a more difficult position, just having to work in space. So if the Green Bay Packers cut him this offseason, because he still does have 2022 under contract, they can save some cap space. So that's the interesting part in this, something that we haven't heard talked about, and understandably so. We're not really looking ahead to next year, but is Yash a candidate to play right tackle?
Yeah.
Because if they see that as as a possible option, then Bakhtiari at left, Yash at right, Elton slides back into left guard, where he's been a Pro Bowler and what looks like a perennial All-Pro at some point. I think that is definitely in play, but really the key in all of this is going to be Billy Turner. And it's also worth noting too, Yash, he's a restricted free agent next year, so Green Bay can tender him and get him on a fairly team-friendly deal, versus if he was an unrestricted free agent, where he would enter free agency and undoubtedly get paid, because we've seen he could go and start today on a number of NFL teams at left tackle. So that's really an interesting question. I think the only thing that we know is Bakhtiari's at left tackle, Myers will be the center, Newman will be the right guard. But like you said, factor in Runyon as well. I didn't even mention him. I mean, it's a terrific problem to have, because you have so many options. And I mean, Elton Jenkins at right tackle, maybe that's also in play. That's the one thing we've learned. Matt LaFleur says it all the time. We're going to put our best 5 on the field. Yep. And to us on the outside looking in, we don't always know what that best 5 is going to entail. I can't imagine many of us expected Yash to be starting against the San Francisco 49ers with Nick Bosa. So it's really going to be interesting. They have a ton of options, and Matt LaFleur, just as he does when it comes to the offensive line configuration, he's going to keep us on our toes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of guys next year. We'll see what happens. And like you said, I do think that Yash is prime candidate for right tackle next year. Looks likely that they'll cut Billy. And then Dennis Kelly's only on a 1-year deal. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, so they got quite a few decisions to make at that offensive line. But overall, compared to last year, it's pretty much a different player at every position. And they're holding up really well, because last year you had Bakhtiari at left tackle, Elton at left guard, Corey Linsley at center. And then Billy Turner at right tackle. Was it Lucas Patrick at center? Lucas was at right guard. A lot of moving pieces all along last year too. Flipping things over to the other side of the ball, though, with the defense, they started out really well this year, and there's been a lot of players that have played unexpectedly very well, even these past few games. But the biggest thing that I think kind of was opened up or exposed, I guess you could say, this past week against Cleveland was the run defense, which just brings back nightmares for Green Bay Packers fans everywhere. And Nick Chubb was the first 100-yard rusher against this Packers defense. And you can't help but get a little nervous heading into this next week against the Vikings, where Dalvin Cook will more than likely be activated from the COVID-19 list before the game. So we'll get to that Vikings game in a little bit. But Paul, what do you think what can you pinpoint one problem on this Packers run defense that allowed Nick Chubb to just run all over them?
I mean, it's a simple answer. They just got bullied. The Browns were more physical and they were better. And I think with this Packers run defense, they're improved over the last 2 seasons. Kenny Clark's been doing Kenny Clark things every single game. Dean Lowry, Kingsley Keke are playing at a higher level. We've seen flashes from Lancaster and Slayton. So I do think that this unit's improved from the past years. However, they still really haven't been that good. I mean, they entered the game giving up 4.5 yards per rush. I think that ranked 25th at the time. Now they rank 31st because of what Nick Chubb did. But this group has never been, even a top 15 unit in regards to stopping the run this season. Like I said, I do think that they are improved. But when you also factor in that Joe Barry's defense, his MO is to take away the pass and to say, if you want to run the ball, go ahead and run the ball. And so that comes with a lot of light boxes. So I think that contributes to why, not just the Browns, but the other teams in general have had success against them, because really it is up to the defensive front, because there's just not a lot of reinforcements behind them. So when you factor in the elevated play of the guys that I'd mentioned, that aspect of it too, and what they're asked to do and what Barry's trying to accomplish, like I said, I do think they're improved. And I don't have a great answer for this Browns game other than they ran into a really, really good offensive line. By ESPN's metrics, that's the top run blocking offensive line in football this season. Nick Chubb, go pick a running back category. I don't care what it is, go pick it. He's probably in the top 5. So there's that factor as well. And then they just got pushed around. It's plain and simple. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Looking ahead to the Vikings game, and we saw Dalvin Cook do that to him last year here in Green Bay. But that's definitely something that's going to have to be fixed. And what Barry is going to run into now, like I said, his goal is to take away the pass. But if teams are running on you that easily and averaging 8 yards a carry, I mean, I hope not, but I don't expect that to be the norm going forward. That was just one of those instances where you just got punched in the mouth. But if teams are able to run as effectively or if more effectively, in the weeks coming, he's going to have a decision to make do I need to start putting more guys in the box? And he did that against the Browns. It's not that he wasn't attempting that, as the game went on, but again, they just got bullied. So it's going to be interesting dynamic to see what adjustments are made to try to counter that. And if teams moving forward really try to exploit that aspect of it. But again, I think it simply comes down to they just got beat.
Yeah, that offensive line for Cleveland was facing a lot of injuries. J.C. Treader, shortly before the game, was placed on the COVID list, Packers legend. But they still have a lot of great players along that offensive line. And the one thing specifically I wanted to ask you about was Kingsley Keke being what I'd assume, unless something popped up on Saturday or Sunday, was a healthy scratch for Green Bay. What do you think was the reason for that? Did they think that, like Keke is more exclusively a pass rusher and they wanted to try Jack Heflin out in the game? What do you think was the thought process behind that?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure. I try not to speculate on that stuff because there's so many possibilities behind the scenes that we don't know of what could have taken place. But I mean, they absolutely could have used him. I mean, even though he is a stronger pass rusher than a run defender, they absolutely could have used him out there. So, man, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if anything comes out this week. Coach has his availability later today, and the other coach as well as the week goes on. I'll be interested to see if any of the reporters ask him about that. Cause I'm absolutely very curious. The part of your defense that needed to be, that was going up against a very stout run game. One of your key contributors was, to our knowledge, a healthy scratch. So it's certainly something to watch moving forward.
Absolutely. So yeah, like you said, we'll see if that comes up at all anywhere this week amongst press conferences. Let's look ahead to this next week against Minnesota. I guess for this game specifically, and then down the line here, Packers obviously have a lot of players injured right now. David Bakhtiari is the only one as of now activated off of injured reserve. Jair Alexander will have to be activated from there this upcoming Wednesday. But this is kind of I guess not a easy or hard question or hypothetical, but just like, well, hopefully we get all of them back, I guess. But what player right now do you think can help the Packers out the most between Jair Alexander, Zadarius Smith, Bakhtiari, and even Marquez Valdez-Scantling?
I mean, I got to go with David Bakhtiari just because I think left tackle is, behind quarterback, perhaps the next most important position on the field. And we just talked about when we were discussing the offensive line, how Rodgers and LaFleur, they have to account for Yash in the game plan. And getting Bakhtiari back, and maybe not necessarily right away, he's going to have to ease himself in. But if we get all pro David Bakhtiari back, that is not a guy that you have to account for at one of the most important positions in football. So I think, of course, that makes the offensive line all the more stronger when you have him back in the mix. And the game of football has changed a lot over the years, but at the end of the day, games are won and lost in the trenches. So by adding an all-pro back to an already very good unit, and again, like what I was saying is when you don't have to account for someone at that position, I think that just opens up the playbook as well in terms of options for what LaFleur and Rodgers can do, and also how they utilize the tight ends. So like I said, they have been active in terms of chipping. So obviously we hope we get all three back of the Zadarius, Jair, and Bakhtiari. Again, just guessing here, it looks like we may see Alexander first.
Yeah.
Just because, like you said, he does have to. Wednesday is the deadline for him to be activated. He has to be put on the 53 or left on IR. And if he's left on IR, his season's over. And everyone keep in mind, just like with Bakhtiari, just because he's back on the 53 doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be on the field Sunday. But Eric Stokes and Rasul Douglas, I mean, credit to them for their level of play this season. But if I had to pick, I would choose Bakhtiari.
Yeah. I think with Alexander specifically, it's looking like it's been frustrating with the other players at the very least. Like the date for them, the return date just keeps on getting pushed back and back. It feels like Matt Fleur's going to be there on Super Bowl media day and be like, "Oh, we'll wait and see how this week of practice goes." But Jair Alexander, like you said, obviously either we'll find out this week. I think he'd get activated, but if not, he'll stay on IR for the rest of the year. And like you just mentioned, all credit to Eric Stokes and Rasul Douglas, two guys who many Packers fans, I think 100% of Packers fans, did not expect to even be starting. Maybe Eric Stokes eventually replacing Kevin Keen's role, but that's whatever. At the very least, to play as good as they did after, I'm sure, like, again, 100% of Packers fans had no idea who Rasul Douglas was, and now he is a team hero. For us, especially down the stretch here. With Jair this week, I'm thinking you look at what Minnesota did to us in the last matchup this year with Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. And that's the one game where Eric Stokes really looked like a rookie. And then for some reason, Kevin Keen was out there in that first quarter instead of Rasul Douglas. Darnell Savage had a rough game besides the few interceptions that he got close to having, one that got called back. So looking ahead to this game against Minnesota, Paul, is there anything besides hopefully a Jair Alexander return, anything that you think the Packers can do different this week?
Well, I think obviously there's the obvious in doing your best to eliminate Justin Jefferson and that big play ability. And remember, we were just talking about where Barry kind of has to potentially has to choose stop the run, stop the pass. That was really the first game, at least that I can remember this season, where he was really faced with that. Because if we look at how Green Bay played Arizona, Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, and Russell Wilson, they did really, really good against those quarterbacks, but they were flat out telling those teams, go run the football. We're not going to let you pass. And like I said, that's Barry's MO. Against Minnesota, they had more guys playing closer to the line of scrimmage because of Dalvin Cook, which opened up things over the top for Justin Jefferson that may not have been there. So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic and something to keep our eyes on and to see how they go about trying to handle Jefferson and Dalvin Cook, because there is a lot of talent on this Vikings team. And I think looking back at the last game, even though Green Bay lost, it's absolutely a game that they let slip away. I mean, how many turnover opportunities did they have? If they can even convert one of those, that game very, very likely could have ended in Green Bay's favor. So the end result was kind of fluky to me in that regard. So, of course, coming back here to Lambeau Field, you have to, and it's the Green Bay Packers, of course, so you have to feel confident. But the big thing is that I'll be watching anyways is how do they handle Dalvin Cook versus Justin Jefferson? You can't commit to trying to take away both. You kind of got to pick one and then hope the other guy is, against whoever, you're not loading up against, can at least try to slow them down. There is no stopping Dalvin Cook. There is no stopping Justin Jefferson. It's just slowing them down enough that they don't absolutely kill you like Justin Jefferson did last time.
Yeah, and I think this game is going to be a lot on weighted on time of possession.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the early forecasts, and even if it's a little bit off, it's going to be a cold one at
Mm-hmm.
the frozen tundra on Sunday, and that calls for a heavy dose of AJ Dillon, at least to my
Absolutely.
predictions. And if AJ Dillon and the Packers offense can kind of keep the ball away from the Vikings as long as possible and force them to not be able to use Dalvin Cook and allow this defense to kind of focus on Justin Jefferson, just simply because Vikings don't have enough time to continue to hand the ball off to Dalvin Cook over and over again, like they did last year at Lambeau.
And I just want to add quick, going back to the run defense, a big part of helping them has been the offense. If we look at the second halves, there's been a lot of games, I think a majority of the games where Green Bay not only has the lead, but they're up like multiple scores.
Yeah.
So of course that helps your run defense as well, because the offense just can't rely on that as heavily because they're down, they're low on time, everything that comes with that. So the offense can be a very, very good friend to this Green Bay Packers run defense in getting out to some, quick starts, which I know has been an issue this season, but or at least having a lead going into the second half, which they have been very good at.
Yeah, and looking ahead to this playoffs here, obviously there's quite a few interesting offenses. The Buccaneers are going to be back in there. Is there a team specifically that you're looking at and thinking, man, I don't think if these two teams match up, it'd be very advantageous for the Packers?
I mean, we've seen them play the Rams the last couple of years, and regardless who's at quarterback, they've been able to, find a way to slow that offense, or slow them enough, I should say. The Buccaneers, we've seen them. The one that's kind of has me intrigued is Dallas, just
Mm-hmm.
because they do have a ton of weapons. Dak Prescott's really good. They have 3 really good receivers, 2 running backs, a very good offensive line. I mean, from top to bottom on that offense, player 1 through player 11, they have some tight ends as well. They're just really well put together. So looking at that offense as a whole, and that's one that has me a little bit concerned, just in regards to especially how this Green Bay Packers defense is playing as of late. What do they stop? The pass? What do they stop the run? Again, we go back to that same question.
Yeah, watching Dallas last night against, I know it's Washington
Mm-hmm.
who's even the record might be selling them as a better team than they really are, even just with the 6-9 record. But it's hard not to look at Dallas putting up 56 points last night and think,
Mm-hmm.
man, that would be a tough matchup for the Packers. Their defense completely turned it around after last year, where it was absolutely abysmal. But adding Micah Parsons into the mix and Trevion Diggs having a breakout season has really turned things around for Dallas. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they have unlimited weapons at the wide receiver position. And then they have Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott. So I don't know if I can take the storyline of Mike McCarthy returning to Lambeau to play Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs. That might be too much. But that would certainly be an exciting one. And there's a lot of interesting teams that will be in the mix for the NFC playoffs this year. Other than that, I think I'm all set. I am hyped for hopefully a snow or a cold, frozen tundra type game against the division rival Minnesota Vikings this weekend. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today.
Appreciate it, Joey. Take care.